The stagecoach lurched to a stop in front of the dusty general store, and Eleanor Zimmerman pressed her gloved hand against the window, wondering if she had made the worst mistake of her life. It was June of 1876, and Red Cloud, Nebraska stretched before her like a promise she wasn't sure anyone intended to keep. The advertisement had been specific: respectable rancher seeking companionship and partnership, no questions asked about the past. She had plenty of past to leave behind, all of it colored in shades of desperation and loss. The driver opened the door, extending a weathered hand to help her down. Eleanor gathered her worn traveling dress and stepped onto the packed earth that served as Main Street, her small trunk thudding beside her with a finality that made her throat tight. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly, turning the Nebraska prairie into waves of shimmering heat. Three buildings clustered together formed what passed for civilization: the general store, a saloon with paint peeling from its sign, and a hotel that looked like it might collapse if someone sneezed too hard. "You the mail order bride for James Whitmore?" The driver's voice carried across the empty street, and Eleanor felt her cheeks burn as a few curious faces appeared in windows. "I am," she said, lifting her chin despite the humiliation crawling up her spine. She had answered the advertisement with nothing but honesty and hope, two things that had served her poorly in Philadelphia after her parents died and her uncle drank away what little inheritance they'd left. When the creditors came knocking, she'd had two choices: a brothel or a husband. She chose the latter, even if it meant traveling halfway across the country to marry a stranger. "Well, he ain't here yet. Said he'd be in town by 4. The driver checked his pocket watch. "It's 3:30 now. You can wait inside the store where it's cooler." Eleanor nodded, not trusting her voice. The driver deposited her trunk just inside the general store's entrance and tipped his hat before climbing back onto the stagecoach. She watched it disappear down the dirt road, taking with it her last connection to everything she'd known. The finality of it pressed against her chest like a heavy stone. The store smelled of leather, tobacco, and something sweet she couldn't identify. A woman behind the counter looked up from her ledger, her face lined with the kind of weariness that came from hard living but kind eyes that softened when they landed on Eleanor. "You must be the bride," she said, coming around the counter. "I'm Martha Henderson. My husband and I run this place. Don't look so frightened, dear. James Whitmore is a good man." Eleanor swallowed hard. "You know him?" "Known him 5 years now, since he settled here after driving cattle up from Texas. He's got a spread about 8 miles northwest of town. Works it mostly alone, though he hires help during branding season." Martha guided Eleanor to a chair near a potbelly stove that thankfully wasn't lit in the June heat. "Can I get you some water? You look parched. Please." Eleanor's voice came out as barely more than a whisper. Martha brought a tin cup filled with cool water, and Eleanor drank gratefully. Why hasn't he married before now? Is there something wrong with him? Wrong? No, honey. Just particular, I'd say. And maybe a bit gun-shy. His parents died of cholera on the trail west when he was 16. He finished the cattle drive, sold the herd, and bought land here with the money. Been building his ranch ever since. I think he got so focused on surviving and building something that he forgot about living. Martha patted Eleanor's hand. But last winter was hard on him. Spent Christmas here in town, and I could see the loneliness eating at him. When spring came, he asked my husband about placing an advertisement back east. Eleanor absorbed this information, trying to picture the man she'd be binding her life to. The advertisement had said very little. Rancher, age 29, seeks honest woman for marriage and partnership. No drinkers or complainers, must be hardy and willing to work. Write to James Whitmore, Red Cloud, Nebraska. She'd written 3 drafts before settling on the truth. Miss Eleanor Zimmerman, age 24, recently orphaned, skilled in cooking, sewing, and gardening, seeking security and honest partnership. No family or prospects in Philadelphia. His response had been equally direct. "Miss Zimmerman, I can offer you security, respect, and a home. I expect honesty, hard work, and loyalty. If this suits you, come to Red Cloud. I will meet you, and we will speak plainly before any vows are exchanged. If either of us is unsuited, I will pay your return passage. James Whitmore. That last line had sealed her decision. He was offering her an escape, not a trap. Even if they didn't suit, she wouldn't be stranded. The store door opened with a jangle of bells, and Eleanor's heart jumped into her throat. But it was just an older man in dusty work clothes who nodded politely before heading to the back of the store. Martha returned to her counter to help him, leaving Eleanor alone with her racing thoughts. What if he took one look at her and sent her back? She knew she wasn't a beauty. Her face was too angular, her mouth too wide, her brown hair too straight to be fashionable. The mirror had never been kind to her, and the last 2 years of grief and hardship had carved hollows under her cheekbones and left shadows beneath her hazel eyes. The door opened again, and this time the man who entered made the room feel smaller. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders that spoke of hard physical labor. His dark brown hair needed cutting, curling slightly at his collar, and his face was tanned from years under the prairie sun. But it was his eyes that caught Eleanor's attention, blue as a deep river, cautious but not unkind. He removed his hat, revealing the pale strip of forehead that marked every man who worked outdoors, and looked directly at her. "Miss Zimmerman?" His voice was deeper than she'd expected, rough like it didn't get used often. Eleanor stood, smoothing her dress with damp palms. "Mr. Whitmore." They stared at each other for a long moment, sizing each other up like buyers at a livestock auction. Eleanor lifted her chin, refusing to shrink under his scrutiny. She might be desperate, but she had her pride. "You're taller than I expected," he said finally. "You're quieter," she replied, then bit her lip, horrified she'd spoken so boldly. But something flickered in his eyes that might have been amusement. "Martha, can we use your back room?" "Of course, James." Martha's voice carried warmth and encouragement. "Take your time." James picked up Eleanor's trunk like it weighed nothing and carried it to a small room behind the store that held a table and a few chairs. Eleanor followed, her heart hammering so hard she was certain he could hear it. He set down her trunk and gestured for her to sit, then took the chair across from her. "I'm going to be honest with you," he said, his hands flat on the table between them. They were working hands, scarred and calloused, but clean. "I need a wife. Not for any romantic notions, but because ranching alone is brutal and I'm tired of being lonely. I can provide you with a home, food, and security. I don't drink to excess, I don't have debts, and I've never raised my hand to a woman. But life on a ranch is hard. We're 8 miles from town, and in winter sometimes we can't get here for weeks. It's isolated, it's demanding, and I need a partner, not a decoration." Eleanor met his gaze steadily. "I'm not afraid of hard work, Mr. Whitmore. I kept my parents' house running while my mother was ill, and after they died, I worked in a textile factory for 18 months until my uncle sold the house to pay his drinking debts. I can cook, clean, sew, tend a garden, and preserve food. I'm strong, and I'm not prone to hysterics. What I need is security and a place to belong. I'm not looking for love or romance. I'm looking for survival." His eyes searched her face. "Why did you really leave Philadelphia?" "Your uncle." "He wanted to marry me off to one of his gambling friends, a man 3 times my age with a reputation for cruelty to his first 2 wives. When I refused, he threw me out with nothing but the clothes I wore. I had no money, no prospects, and no family willing to help. I saw your advertisement in the newspaper the same day I saw another advertisement for a brothel seeking new girls. I chose you." The bluntness of her words hung between them. James's jaw tightened, and for a moment she thought she'd said too much. Then he nodded slowly. "That took courage, telling me that. Most women would have prettied it up." He leaned back in his chair, studying her. "I respect honesty, Miss Zimmerman. So here's more honesty. I'm not an easy man. I'm used to being alone, to doing things my way. I don't talk much. I work from before dawn until after dark most days. But I'll treat you fairly, and I'll never abandon you or throw you out. If you agree to this marriage, it's permanent as far as I'm concerned. For better or worse. Eleanor felt something loosen in her chest. That's all I want, Mr. Whitmore. Permanence, security, a place where I don't have to be afraid every day. Then we understand each other. He stood, and she rose as well. There's a preacher in town. We can marry today if you're willing, and I'll take you home to the ranch. Or we can wait, give you time to be sure. I'm sure, Eleanor said. The words came out stronger than she felt, but she meant them. There was nothing for her back east but poverty and shame. Whatever lay ahead on James Whitmore's ranch, it had to be better than that. All right then. He extended his hand, and she took it. His grip was firm but gentle, and for the first time since leaving Philadelphia, Eleanor felt something like hope kindle in her chest. They were married an hour later in the small church at the edge of town. The preacher's wife and Martha Henderson served as witnesses, and the ceremony took less than 10 minutes. Eleanor spoke her vows in a steady voice, and when James slipped a simple gold band on her finger, she stared at it in wonder. She was Eleanor Whitmore now. She belonged somewhere. James paid the preacher, thanked the witnesses, and loaded Eleanor's trunk onto the back of his wagon. The conveyance was sturdy but plain, pulled by two solid horses that looked like they'd been bred for work rather than show. Eleanor settled onto the wooden bench seat, arranging her skirts, and James climbed up beside her. As they pulled away from Red Cloud, Eleanor looked back at the small cluster of buildings. Martha Henderson stood in front of the general store, waving. Eleanor waved back, then turned to face forward, toward whatever future awaited her. The prairie stretched endlessly in all directions, golden grass rippling in the wind like waves on an ocean. The sky overhead was so vast and blue, it made Eleanor's eyes ache. She'd never seen so much open space. In Philadelphia, buildings had crowded close, blocking out the sky and trapping the air. Here the horizon seemed impossibly distant, and the silence was broken only by the creak of wagon wheels, the clopping of horse hooves, and the whisper of wind through grass. It's beautiful, she said softly. James glanced at her, surprised. Most women find it lonely. I've been lonely in crowds. At least here the loneliness is honest. Eleanor folded her hands in her lap. Tell me about your ranch. He seemed to relax slightly, as if talking about his land was easier than talking about anything else. 320 acres. I've got about 200 head of cattle, a dozen horses, some chickens, and a milk cow. The house is small but solid. I built it myself. 2 rooms right now, but I've been planning to add on. There's a barn, a chicken coop, and a good well. Creek runs through the property. Never dries up even in the worst summers. Do you sell the cattle in town? I drive them to the railhead in Grand Island come fall. Usually join up with other ranchers for the drive. Safety in numbers. He paused. It's dangerous country still. The Pawnee were relocated to Oklahoma Territory, but there are still occasional bands passing through. And there are outlaws who prey on isolated ranches. Eleanor felt a chill despite the heat. Have you had trouble? Once, 3 years back, some drifters tried to steal my horses. I convinced them it wasn't worth the bullet I'd put in them. His voice was matter of fact. I keep a rifle in the house and another in the barn. I'll teach you to shoot. Out here, everyone needs to know how to protect themselves. The practicality of it should have frightened her, but instead, Eleanor felt oddly reassured. James wasn't pretending the world was safe. He was preparing her for reality. They rode in silence for a while, and Eleanor studied her new husband from the corner of her eye. His profile was strong, all hard angles and sun-weathered skin. His hands on the reins were steady and sure. There was a quiet competence about him that eased some of the anxiety knotted in her stomach. Why did you really send for a wife? She asked. The truth, not the practical reasons. James was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, without looking at her, he said, "Last winter was brutal. Lost 20 head of cattle to the cold, and spent weeks snowed in with nothing but my own thoughts. When spring came and the snow melted, I realized I'd gone nearly 3 months without speaking to another human being. I looked around my house one morning and thought, this is it. This is all there will ever be, unless I do something different." He finally glanced at her. "I'm not good with people, never have been. But I didn't want to die alone on this prairie with no one to even know I was gone." The raw honesty of it hit Eleanor hard. "I understand that," she said quietly. "After my parents died, I felt invisible, like I could disappear and no one would notice or care. It's a terrible way to feel." "Yes," James said, and something in that single word created a fragile connection between them. They were two lonely people trying to build something solid out of their shared isolation. The ranch appeared gradually, first a dark smudge on the horizon that resolved into buildings as they drew closer. The house was indeed small, built of sod with a wooden door and 2 windows with real glass. A barn stood nearby, larger than the house, and various outbuildings dotted the landscape. But what caught Eleanor's attention was the garden plot near the house, neatly fenced against wildlife, but currently holding only a few struggling vegetables. "I'm not much of a gardener," James admitted, following her gaze. "But the soil's good. I built that fence hoping whoever came would be able to make use of it." "I can do that," Eleanor said, and felt a spark of genuine enthusiasm. Having something to nurture, to grow, would help. James helped her down from the wagon, and for a moment his hands lingered at her waist. Their eyes met, and Eleanor saw uncertainty in his face. He was as nervous as she was, she realized. That made him seem more human, less intimidating. "I'll show you the house," he said, releasing her. The interior was dim and cool, the thick sod walls keeping out the heat. The main room held a cast-iron stove, a rough wooden table with 2 chairs, and a rocking chair near the window. Shelves lined one wall, holding dishes, supplies, and a few books. A doorway led to the second room, which held a bed covered with a patchwork quilt and a trunk at its foot. "I sleep in here," James said from behind her. "I can move to the barn tonight, let you have privacy until you're comfortable." Eleanor turned to face him. "We're married, Mr. Whitmore. I may not know you, but I understand what marriage means. You don't need to sleep in the barn." His expression was difficult to read. "I won't force anything on you, Mrs. Whitmore. We can take our time." The formality of him calling her Mrs. Whitmore made something flutter in Eleanor's chest. She was somebody's wife now. She had a name that meant something, belonged somewhere. "I appreciate that," she said. "But I also understand the practicalities. This is your home. I'm the newcomer. I don't want to displace you." James studied her for a long moment. "All right. We'll share the room, but nothing more until we're both ready." "Fair?" "Fair." They stood awkwardly in the doorway until James cleared his throat. "I'll get your trunk. Then I need to tend the animals before dark. You can look around. Get your bearings. There's food in the larder if you're hungry." He brought in her trunk and left her alone to unpack and explore. Eleanor moved through the small house, taking stock of her new home. It was sparse but clean, everything practical and necessary with no frivolous decoration. The dishes were mismatched but functional. The cast-iron stove was well maintained. The bed was made with military precision. This was a house where someone survived, but it wasn't yet a home where someone lived. She unpacked her few possessions: 3 dresses, undergarments, a nightgown, a hairbrush, her mother's Bible, and a small tin containing the last remaining jewelry her uncle hadn't found to sell. She arranged them in the trunk at the foot of the bed, then changed from her traveling dress into her work dress, a faded blue calico that had seen better days, but was sturdy and practical. In the main room, she investigated the larder: flour, beans, dried beef, salt pork, coffee, and various staples filled the shelves, along with a few jars of preserved vegetables that looked store-bought rather than homemade. She found potatoes in a bin and onions hanging in a net. There was food here, but it needed a woman's touch to transform it into proper meals. Eleanor built up the fire in the stove and set water to boil. She'd make coffee and something hot for supper. It would be her first meal as a wife, and she wanted it to be good. By the time James returned, dusty and tired, she had beans simmering with salt pork and onions, fresh coffee brewing, and cornbread baking in the oven. He stopped in the doorway, staring at the table she'd set with plates and cups. "Something smells good," he said, surprise evident in his voice. "It's simple, but it should be filling." Eleanor poured coffee into both cups. "Sit. You must be tired." He sat slowly, like a man unaccustomed to being cared for. When she served him a plate of food, he bowed his head briefly in silent grace, then took a bite. His eyes widened slightly. "This is the best meal I've had in months," he said. "Maybe years. It's just beans and cornbread." But Eleanor felt warm pleasure at his praise. "It's hot, it's seasoned, and someone made it for me. That makes it special." James ate with the focused intensity of a man who usually treated food as fuel rather than pleasure. "You're a good cook." They ate in companionable silence, and Eleanor realized this was the first meal she'd shared with anyone in nearly a year. In Philadelphia, she'd eaten alone in her tiny rented room, huddled over a sad little spirit lamp. This, sitting at a table with someone across from her, felt like a luxury she'd forgotten. After supper, James helped her wash the dishes, which surprised her. "My mother taught me to pull my weight," he explained when he saw her expression. "I won't be one of those men who thinks women should do everything." "That's refreshing." Eleanor handed him a plate to dry. "Most men think domestic work is beneath them." "Most men are fools." James carefully dried the plate and set it on the shelf. "Out here, everyone works or everyone dies. Pride is a luxury we can't afford." As darkness fell, James lit kerosene lamps and pulled out a worn deck of cards. "Do you play?" "My father taught me." Eleanor smiled at the memory. He was terrible at it, but he loved to play. They played several hands of rummy at the kitchen table, and Eleanor noticed James starting to relax. His shoulders dropped from their defensive hunch, and he almost smiled when she won 3 hands in a row. "You hustled me," he said, but there was no accusation in his tone. "I warned you my father taught me. I didn't say he taught me badly." Eleanor shuffled the cards with practiced ease. "One more hand? I should probably quit while I still have my dignity." It was the closest thing to a joke she'd heard from him, and Eleanor laughed. The sound surprised them both. James stared at her, and Eleanor felt her cheeks heat. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to be loud." "Don't apologize." James's voice was soft. "I like the sound. This house has been too quiet for too long." The intimacy of the statement hung between them, and Eleanor's pulse quickened. There was something in the way he looked at her, something that made her aware of him as a man rather than just a stranger she'd married. "It's late," James said, finally standing. "We should get some rest. Tomorrow will be a full day. I need to ride out to check the cattle, but I thought you might want to look over the garden, see what you need from town." Eleanor nodded, suddenly nervous about the sleeping arrangements. But when they entered the bedroom, James simply removed his boots and shirt, then lay down on top of the quilt on his side of the bed, still wearing his trousers. He turned to face the wall, giving her privacy. Eleanor changed into her nightgown behind the privacy of the trunk lid, then slipped under the quilt on her side of the bed. The bed was narrow enough that she could feel his warmth, hear his breathing, but he kept carefully to his side, true to his word. "Good night, Eleanor," he said quietly. "Good night, James." She lay awake for a long time, staring into the darkness, acutely aware of the man beside her. This was her life now. This man, this house, this vast prairie. It should have terrified her, but instead she felt something like peace settling over her tired body. She was safe here. For the first time in 2 years, she was truly safe. Eleanor woke to the sound of James moving quietly around the room, getting dressed in the pre-dawn darkness. She stayed still, watching through half-closed eyes as he pulled on his shirt and boots with efficient movements. He glanced at the bed, seemed satisfied she was still sleeping, and slipped out of the room. She heard him building up the fire in the stove, the clink of the coffee pot, the soft thud of the door as he went outside. Eleanor sat up, pushing her hair out of her face. Pale gray light filtered through the window. It must be close to 5 in the morning. She dressed quickly and joined James in the main room. He looked up from where he was pulling on his coat, surprise flickering across his face. "You don't need to get up this early," he said. "I'm a rancher's wife now. I should keep rancher's hours." Eleanor moved to the stove. "Let me make you breakfast before you go. I usually just grab coffee and jerky." "Well, today you'll have eggs and bacon." She'd found both in the larder the night before. "It won't take long." James hesitated, then nodded and sat at the table. Eleanor worked efficiently, frying bacon and eggs in the cast iron skillet. When she set a full plate in front of him, along with fresh coffee, he looked at it like she'd given him a gift. They ate quickly, and James explained his plan for the day. "I need to ride the fence line on the south pasture, make sure nothing's broken. Should take most of the day. There's a shotgun above the door and a pistol in the drawer by the bed. Keep the doors locked. If anyone comes by that you don't know, don't open the door." Eleanor nodded, trying not to let fear show on her face. "I'll be fine. I'll work on the garden." James pulled a leather pouch from his pocket and set it on the table. "There's money here. Not a lot, but enough for emergencies. I trust you with it." The simple statement of trust made Eleanor's throat tight. "Thank you." He stood, settling his hat on his head. At the door, he paused and looked back at her. "Be careful, Eleanor." "I mean it. I will. You too." After he left, the house felt enormous and empty. Eleanor cleaned up from breakfast, then armed herself with a hoe and a bucket and went to investigate the garden plot. The morning air was already warm, promising another hot day. In the distance, she could see cattle grazing, and beyond them, the endless prairie stretched to the horizon. The garden was weedy, but salvageable. Someone, James, she assumed, had planted beans, tomatoes, and squash, but without regular tending, they were struggling. Eleanor spent the morning weeding, watering from the well, and assessing what could be saved. She found wild herbs growing near the creek and carefully transplanted them to the garden. By noon, her back ached and her hands were blistered, but the garden looked dramatically better. She went inside to escape the worst of the midday heat and made herself a simple lunch of bread and cheese. While she ate, she examined the house with a more critical eye. It was clean but bare. No curtains softened the windows. No rug warmed the floor. The walls were plain sod with no decoration. This was the home of a man who'd forgotten how to make a space comfortable rather than just functional. Eleanor spent the afternoon sewing curtains from fabric she found in her trunk, an old dress too worn to be salvaged as clothing, but good enough for this purpose. She fashioned simple panels and hung them at the windows. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The harsh prairie light became soft and golden, and the room felt more intimate, more like a home. When James returned just before sunset, he stopped in the doorway and stared. "What did you do?" "Made curtains. I hope you don't mind." Eleanor felt suddenly uncertain. "I can take them down if you don't like them." "No." James stepped inside, looking around the room with wonder. "It's good. It's really good. It feels different in here." "It feels like a home," Eleanor said softly. His eyes met hers, and something passed between them, some understanding that they were building something together. "Yes," he agreed. "It does." That night, Eleanor made a proper roast with potatoes and carrots, and James told her about his day. His words came easier now, his natural reticence softening. He talked about the fence he'd repaired, The calf he'd found caught in brush and freed, the way the grass was growing thick and green despite the heat. Eleanor told him about the garden, about the wild herbs she'd transplanted, about her plans for preserving vegetables come harvest time. They played cards again after supper, and James laughed when she won. It was a rusty sound, like something that didn't get used often, but it was genuine. That night in bed, they lay closer than before, their shoulders almost touching. James fell asleep quickly, his breathing deep and even, and Eleanor lay awake thinking about how strange and wonderful it was to feel safe. She'd been so afraid for so long, but here in this small sod house on the Nebraska prairie, wrapped in darkness and the sound of her husband's breathing, she felt protected. The days developed a rhythm. James rose before dawn to tend the animals and ride out to check the cattle. Eleanor tended the garden, cooked meals, cleaned the house, and slowly made the space more livable. She found wildflowers on the prairie and brought them inside in an old jar. She baked bread twice a week, filling the house with warmth and the scent of yeast. She mended James's worn clothes and made new curtains for the bedroom. In the evenings, they talked more easily. James told her about his parents, about the cattle drive that had killed them and shaped him. Eleanor shared memories of her mother's garden in Philadelphia, her father's terrible singing voice, the happiness that had existed before illness and debt destroyed everything. 2 weeks after their wedding, James took Eleanor into town for supplies. She compiled a careful list: seeds for the garden, fabric for new clothes, sugar and spices to improve her cooking. James added ammunition, nails, and rope to the list. In the general store, Martha Henderson greeted Eleanor warmly. "How are you settling in, dear?" "Very well, thank you." Eleanor smiled and meant it. "The house is lovely, and James has been very kind." Martha glanced at James, who was examining harness leather with her husband, and lowered her voice. "I can see a difference in him already. He looks less haunted. You're good for him." Eleanor felt warmth bloom in her chest. She wanted to be good for James. Somewhere in the past 2 weeks, his well-being had become important to her. While James conducted business, Eleanor explored the store, admiring fabric she couldn't afford and dreaming about improvements to the house. A bolt of blue calico caught her eye, exactly the color of James's eyes. She ran her fingers over it wistfully. "Get what you need," James said from behind her, and she jumped. He was close enough that she could feel the heat of him. "If you want that fabric, get it. I have dresses. I don't need more." Want and need are different things. He pulled money from his pocket. "Get the fabric, Eleanor. Make yourself something pretty." The kindness of it made her eyes sting with unshed tears. "Thank you." On the ride home, Eleanor held the wrapped fabric in her lap like treasure. James had also insisted on buying her a new bonnet to protect her from the sun and a pair of sturdy work gloves. Such simple things, but they felt like love letters. "James," she said hesitantly, "why are you being so generous?" He kept his eyes on the road. "You left everything behind to come here. The least I can do is make sure you have what you need." He paused. "And maybe some of what you want, too. I want you to know I'm happy here," Eleanor blurted. "I was so afraid on that stagecoach, but you've made this so much easier than I expected. You're a good man." James's hands tightened on the reins, and a muscle jumped in his jaw. "You're a good woman, Eleanor. Better than I deserve." "That's not true. You don't know what kind of man I am, what I've done." His voice was rough. Eleanor laid her hand on his arm, feeling the muscle tense beneath her touch. "Then tell me." James was silent for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, still staring straight ahead, he said, "After my parents died, I was angry. So angry I couldn't see straight. I picked fights, drank too much, nearly got myself killed 6 times. The trail boss finally beat some sense into me, told me I could honor my parents by living well, or dishonor them by dying stupid. It took me a long time to choose living. You were 16 and grieving, Eleanor said gently. You're allowed to have made mistakes. I hurt people, good people who were just trying to help me. And have you made amends? Where I could. Then you're not that angry boy anymore. You're the man who built this ranch, who sends for a wife he treats with respect, who buys fabric he can't afford because he wants to see her smile. Eleanor squeezed his arm. That's the man I see, James. That's the man I married. He finally looked at her, and the vulnerability in his eyes made her heart ache. I want to be worthy of you. Then we'll work on being worthy of each other. Eleanor smiled. That seems like a fair partnership to me. Something shifted between them in that moment, some wall coming down. When they reached the ranch, James helped Eleanor down from the wagon, and his hands lingered at her waist. They stood close, close enough that Eleanor could see the flecks of darker blue in his eyes, could feel his breath on her face. Eleanor, he said softly, and her name on his lips sounded like a prayer. Yes? Can I kiss you? Her heart hammered against her ribs. Yes. He lowered his head slowly, giving her time to change her mind. But Eleanor rose on her toes to meet him. The kiss was gentle, tentative, the kiss of two people learning each other. His lips were warm and dry, and his hand came up to cup her face with surprising tenderness. Eleanor's eyes fluttered closed, and she let herself feel, really feel, for the first time in years. When they pulled apart, James rested his forehead against hers. I didn't expect this, he whispered. What? To want you, to care about you. I thought this would be a practical arrangement, but Eleanor, you've become important to me. Tears pricked Eleanor's eyes. You've become important to me too. They stood together in the late afternoon sun, holding each other like lifelines, and Eleanor realized she was falling in love with her husband. It hadn't been part of the plan, hadn't been something she'd thought possible, but her heart hadn't asked permission. It had simply opened and let James in. That night they made love for the first time. It was awkward and tender, two inexperienced people fumbling toward intimacy. James was gentle, constantly asking if she was all right, if he was hurting her. Eleanor clung to him, overwhelmed by the vulnerability of being known so completely. Afterward, they lay tangled together, James's arms around her, and Eleanor felt truly married for the first time. Are you all right? James murmured into her hair. More than all right. Eleanor traced patterns on his chest. I feel like I'm home. His arms tightened around her. You are home. This is your home, and I'm your home, and you never have to leave. The promise of it, the permanence, made Eleanor's throat tight with emotion. She had nowhere else to go, and James was making sure she never had to go anywhere. She was wanted here. She was needed. She was loved, even if neither of them had said the words yet. Summer deepened across the prairie, and with it, Eleanor and James's relationship deepened too. They learned each other's rhythms, each other's preferences. Eleanor discovered that James loved apple pie above all desserts, so she hoarded the dried apples and made it special when they could afford fresh ones from town. James noticed Eleanor shivering one cool evening and built her a shawl rack near the fire, then surprised her with a new wool shawl the next time they went to town. They worked side by side in the garden, James no longer leaving it entirely to Eleanor. They rode out together to check the cattle, Eleanor learning to handle a horse with confidence. They fixed fences together, branded calves together, built a chicken coop addition together. Partnership became more than a word. It became the foundation of their marriage. One evening in late July, a storm rolled across the prairie with frightening speed. Eleanor had never seen clouds so black or lightning so violent. James hurried the animals into shelter and secured everything that could blow away, then pulled Eleanor inside the house and barred the door. The storm hit like a physical force. Wind screamed around the sod walls, and rain hammered the roof. Lightning turned the world outside the windows into a strobing nightmare. Eleanor huddled in James's arms, trying not to show her fear, but he felt her trembling. It's all right, he said, his voice steady. The house has weathered worse. We're safe here. It's so violent. Prairie storms are fierce, but they pass quickly. By morning, it will be beautiful again. He tilted her face up to his. I won't let anything happen to you, Eleanor. I promise. She believed him. Against all logic, against all her experience of the world, she believed he would keep her safe. The storm raged for 2 hours, then passed as quickly as it had come. In the morning, the prairie sparkled with moisture, and the garden had been thoroughly watered. A few branches had broken from the cottonwoods near the creek, but otherwise the ranch was undamaged. See, James said, surveying the scene with satisfaction. We're tougher than any storm. Eleanor laughed, giddy with relief. We're tougher than we look. As summer faded into autumn, the work intensified. James hired 2 cowboys to help drive the cattle to Grand Island for sale. Eleanor packed food for the journey and tried not to worry about James being gone for 2 weeks. He was anxious about leaving her alone, but she insisted she'd be fine. I've got the shotgun, the doors lock, and Martha said she'd ride out to check on me. Eleanor assured him. Go, do what needs to be done. James kissed her hard before he left, and Eleanor stood in the doorway, watching until he disappeared over the horizon. The ranch felt too quiet without him, too empty. She threw herself into work, harvesting the garden and preserving everything she could. She made jams and pickles, dried beans and squash, and felt a deep satisfaction at the jars lining the shelves. They would eat well this winter. Martha Henderson did indeed ride out, bringing her 15-year-old daughter, Sarah. They spent the day helping Eleanor finish the harvest and chattering about town gossip. It was the first time Eleanor had spent time with other women since arriving in Nebraska, and she hadn't realized how much she'd missed female company. You look happy, Martha observed as they sat on the porch, shelling beans in the afternoon sun. Really happy, not just making do. Eleanor smiled. I am happy. James is a wonderful husband, kind and patient and hardworking. I feel lucky. He's the lucky one, Martha said firmly. That man was turning into stone before you arrived. Now he smiles. He actually smiles. Do you know how rare that is? He smiles at me all the time, Eleanor said, surprised. Exactly my point. Martha patted her hand. You've given each other something precious. Don't take it for granted. Eleanor thought about that conversation long after Martha and Sarah left. She'd come to Nebraska expecting nothing but security, and instead she'd found love. Real love, the kind that grew from shared work and quiet evenings and learning to trust someone completely. James had given her a home, but more than that, he'd given her a future. When James returned from Grand Island, Eleanor ran to meet him. He swung down from his horse and caught her up in his arms, spinning her around. He smelled of dust and cattle and sweat, and Eleanor didn't care. She kissed him fiercely, pouring all her loneliness and relief into it. I missed you, she said against his mouth. I missed you every minute. James set her down but kept his arms around her. The cattle sold well. We have money for winter supplies, and some left over. We can add on to the house like I've been planning. Really? Eleanor's eyes lit up. We could have a separate bedroom and a larger main room? We could. And I was thinking maybe a washroom too, so you don't have to heat water on the stove for baths. James looked almost shy. I want you to be comfortable, Eleanor. I want this to be a real home. It already is. She cupped his face in her hands. But yes, I'd love to expand. We can make this place even better. They spent the next weeks planning the addition. James drew rough sketches, and Eleanor offered suggestions. They decided on 2 additional rooms, a proper bedroom and a combination washroom and storage space. James ordered lumber from town and hired the same 2 cowboys who'd helped with the cattle drive to assist with construction. While the men worked on the addition, Eleanor prepared for winter. She sewed new quilts, mended every piece of clothing they owned, and cooked large batches of stew and soup that she froze outside once the weather turned cold enough. She knitted socks and mittens, learning the skill from Martha Henderson during a visit to town. The addition was completed in early November, just before the first serious snow. Eleanor walked through the new rooms, marveling at how much space they had now. The bedroom was larger, with room for a real wardrobe and a dressing table. The washroom had a large tub and a drain that led outside, along with shelves for linens and supplies. "It's perfect," she told James, who stood in the doorway watching her explore. "Absolutely perfect." "Good." He pulled her close. "Because I have news." Something in his tone made Eleanor's heart skip. "What news?" "I bought the adjoining property. Old man Hendricks is moving back east to live with his daughter, and he offered me his land at a good price. It nearly doubles our acreage." Eleanor gasped. "James, that's wonderful. But can we afford it?" "Barely. It'll be tight for a while, but it's good land, and it will make us more secure long term." He hesitated. "There's something else. Hendricks mentioned that if we wanted to, we could use some of the land for farming instead of just ranching. Wheat does well here. It would diversify our income." "Would you want to farm?" Eleanor asked carefully. She knew James loved working with cattle. "I'd want to try, and I'd want your help deciding how much land to convert, what to plant. You're my partner, Eleanor. We make decisions together." The respect in his words, the way he valued her opinion, made Eleanor fall in love with him all over again. "Then let's talk about it. Let's plan together." They spent the evening discussing possibilities, sketching plans, dreaming about the future. At some point, Eleanor realized they were talking about years from now, about building something that would last, and her heart felt full to bursting. That night in bed, wrapped in James's arms in their new bedroom, Eleanor said, "I love you." James went very still. "What?" "I love you, James Whitmore. I didn't think I would. I didn't even think I could. But I do. I love you completely." He rolled to face her, his eyes searching hers in the moonlight. "I love you too. I've been afraid to say it, afraid you wouldn't believe me. But Eleanor, you're everything to me. Everything." They made love with a new intensity, a new openness, two people no longer holding back. Afterward, James traced lazy patterns on Eleanor's arm and said, "Thank you for answering my advertisement. Thank you for taking a chance on me. Thank you for giving me a home, for making me feel wanted." Eleanor kissed his shoulder. "I had nowhere else to go, and you made sure I never had to leave." "You never will," James promised. "This is your home forever, if you want it." "I want it. I want you. I want this life we're building." Eleanor smiled in the darkness. "I want everything." Winter settled over the prairie with a vengeance. Snow piled high around the house, and the temperature dropped so low that the water in the wash basin froze solid overnight despite the fire. But inside the house, Eleanor and James created their own warmth. They spent long evenings reading aloud to each other, playing cards, and planning for spring. James taught Eleanor to whittle, and she carved rough animals that made him laugh. Eleanor taught James to bake, and his first attempt at biscuits came out so hard they joked about using them as ammunition. The isolation that had nearly broken James the previous winter became a gift this year. They were sealed away from the world, but together, and that made all the difference. They learned each other completely, not just physically, but emotionally. They shared fears and dreams and memories. They argued occasionally, usually about minor things like how much wood to bring in or whether they needed more supplies from town, but they always resolved it with communication and compromise. One January morning, Eleanor woke feeling ill. She barely made it outside before vomiting in the snow. James, alarmed, wanted to ride to town for the doctor despite the blizzard conditions, but Eleanor stopped him. "Wait," she said, wiping her mouth. "How long has it been since my monthly courses?" James looked confused for a moment, then understanding dawned. "You think you're pregnant?" "I might be. I've been tired, and my breasts are tender, and now this. Eleanor pressed a hand to her stomach. I think there might be a baby. James's face went through a series of emotions: shock, fear, and finally joy. He gathered Eleanor carefully into his arms. A baby! We're going to have a baby! Are you happy about it? Eleanor asked, suddenly anxious. They'd never discussed children. Happy? James pulled back to look at her. Eleanor, I'm terrified and thrilled and completely overwhelmed. But yes, I'm happy. So happy. The pregnancy was confirmed when they could finally make it to town in late February. The doctor examined Eleanor and declared her about 3 months along, due in July. James walked around in a daze for days, alternating between excitement and panic. What if I'm a terrible father? He asked one evening. What if I don't know what to do? Then we'll figure it out together, Eleanor said calmly. She was much less worried than James. Yes, childbirth was dangerous, and raising a child would be hard, but they would manage. They'd managed everything else. No parent knows what they're doing at first. We'll learn. James threw himself into preparing for the baby. He built a cradle from wood he'd been saving, sanding it smooth and carving simple designs into the headboard. Eleanor sewed tiny clothes from fabric Martha donated, marveling at how small people started out. They converted a corner of the bedroom into a nursery area, hanging curtains to create a private space. Spring came late, but spectacular. The prairie exploded with wildflowers, and Eleanor, her belly swelling with their child, walked among them with wonder. She felt ungainly and beautiful all at once, fascinated by the changes in her body. James treated her like she was made of glass, constantly worried she was doing too much. I'm pregnant, not dying, Eleanor finally snapped after he insisted she sit down instead of weeding the garden. Women have been having babies since the beginning of time. I can handle pulling weeds. I just don't want anything to happen to you, James said, looking miserable. Eleanor's irritation melted. I know, but you have to let me live my life. I'll be careful, but I can't just sit still for 4 more months. They compromised. Eleanor could do light work, but promised to rest when she felt tired. James hovered less, but still watched her carefully, and Eleanor found his protectiveness endearing, rather than smothering once he pulled back a bit. In May, they traveled to town for supplies and to let the doctor check on Eleanor. While James loaded sacks of seed into the wagon, Eleanor visited with Martha at the general store. They were discussing baby clothes when the door burst open and a young woman stumbled in, her face bruised and her dress torn. Please, she gasped. Help me. Martha rushed forward, catching the woman as she collapsed. Dear Lord, what happened? My husband, the woman sobbed. He drinks, and when he drinks, he gets violent. I tried to leave, and he followed me. Please don't let him find me. Eleanor recognized the desperation in the woman's face. It could have been her, fleeing her uncle's house in Philadelphia. You're safe here, she said firmly. Martha, can we take her to the back room? They'd just gotten the woman settled when a man burst through the door. He was drunk, swaying on his feet, and his face was twisted with rage. Where is she? Where's my wife? Not here, Martha said calmly. You need to leave, Mr. Potter. That's my wife. She belongs to me. Potter tried to push past Martha, but James appeared in the doorway, blocking his path. He didn't say anything, just stood there, but his presence was enough. Potter took one look at James's cold expression and stumbled backward. This ain't over, Potter slurred. She's my wife. She's a person, James said quietly. And right now, she doesn't want to be around you. Come back when you're sober if she'll see you then. Potter cursed but left. James turned to Martha. Is she all right? Bruised and frightened. Her name is Alice Potter. She's been married about 6 months. Eleanor came out of the back room, her face set with determination. She can't go back to him. Legally, she's his wife, Martha said regretfully. Unless she leaves town, there's nothing we can do. Then she comes with us, Eleanor said. James looked at her in surprise, but she continued. We have room. She can help around the ranch, earn her keep until she figures out what she wants to do. We can't just leave her here to be beaten. James studied Eleanor's face, seeing the steel beneath the kindness. All right, if she wants to come, she's welcome. Alice Potter was 20 years old, frightened but grateful. She agreed to come to the ranch, and they left town quickly before her husband could cause more trouble. On the ride home, Alice sat silently in the wagon bed, staring at the prairie with hollow eyes. At the ranch, Eleanor showed Alice to the old bedroom, which they'd been using for storage. It's not much, but it's yours for as long as you need it. You're safe here. Why are you helping me? Alice asked. You don't know me. Because someone helped me once, Eleanor said, thinking of James and his advertisement. Because no one should have to be afraid in their own home. Because it's the right thing to do. Over the next weeks, Alice slowly came out of her shell. She was a hard worker, helping with the garden and the chickens and the cooking. She rarely smiled, but the fear in her eyes gradually faded. James was careful around her, never approaching too quickly or raising his voice, and Eleanor saw Alice watching them interact with wonder, as if she couldn't believe a man could be gentle. One evening, Alice and Eleanor sat on the porch, shelling peas while James worked in the barn. He's not like other men, Alice said quietly. No, he's not, Eleanor agreed. But there are good men out there, Alice. Men who don't use their fists, who see women as partners instead of property. I thought Harold was good. Before we married, he was so charming. Alice's voice broke. How do you tell the difference? Eleanor thought about it. I don't know if you can, always. James and I barely knew each other when we married, but I think you look for respect, for kindness in small things, for someone who listens to you and values your opinion. James does all those things. I wish I'd waited. I wish I'd known. Alice wiped her eyes. But I can't go back. I can only go forward. Then go forward, Eleanor said gently. You're young, Alice. You have your whole life ahead of you. Once your husband agrees to a divorce or you get far enough away, you can start fresh. Do you think he'd agree to a divorce? I think most men would rather be rid of an unhappy wife than keep fighting. Give it time. James approached the situation practically. He rode into town and spoke with Potter while sober, offering him money to agree to a divorce. Potter, faced with James's quiet intimidation and the prospect of cash, agreed. It wasn't legal yet, but it was a start. James also contacted a lawyer in Grand Island who specialized in such cases. By early July, as Eleanor's due date approached, Alice had transformed. She smiled more, laughed at James's rare jokes, and had begun making plans to move to Colorado, where she had a cousin. She'd saved money from helping at the ranch and felt confident about starting over. The baby came on a sweltering July night during a thunderstorm. Eleanor's labor was long and difficult, and James paced the main room like a caged animal, while Martha, Henderson, and Alice attended to Eleanor. Every cry of pain from the bedroom made him flinch. He'd faced down cattle stampedes and outlaws without fear, but the thought of losing Eleanor terrified him beyond reason. Please, he prayed to a God he wasn't sure listened. Please let her be all right. Take anything else but leave her with me. Finally, after 14 hours of labor, a baby's cry pierced the air. James stopped pacing, his heart hammering. Martha emerged from the bedroom, beaming. You have a son, she announced. A healthy boy. And Eleanor is tired but fine. James practically ran into the bedroom. Eleanor lay propped against pillows, pale and sweaty, but smiling. In her arms was a tiny red-faced infant with a shock of dark hair. James, meet your son, she said softly. James knelt beside the bed, staring at the baby in wonder. He reached out a tentative finger, and the baby's tiny hand closed around it. Something in James's chest cracked open, a fierce protective love flooding through him. He's perfect, James whispered. You're perfect. I can't believe you did this. We did this, Eleanor corrected, exhausted but happy. What should we name him? They'd discussed names but never settled on one. Now looking at his son, James said, Thomas, after your father. Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. Really? Really? Thomas James Whitmore. James kissed Eleanor's forehead. Thank you. Thank you for him, for you, for everything. The next weeks were a blur of sleepless nights and constant feedings. Thomas was a hungry, loud baby who didn't sleep more than 2 hours at a stretch. Eleanor was exhausted, and James did everything he could to help, changing diapers and rocking the baby when Eleanor needed rest. Alice pitched in too, cooking and cleaning so Eleanor could focus on recovering and caring for Thomas. I never imagined this, Eleanor said one night, nursing Thomas while James dozed in the rocking chair nearby. A real family. A home. I never thought I'd have this. James opened his eyes and smiled at her. Neither did I, but we built it together. In August, Alice left for Colorado. She hugged Eleanor and James goodbye, tears streaming down her face. You saved my life, she told them. Both of you, I'll never forget it. Be happy, Eleanor said. That's all we want for you. After Alice left, the ranch felt quiet with just the three of them. Eleanor settled into motherhood, discovering reserves of patience and love she hadn't known she possessed. Thomas grew quickly, his eyes turning blue like his father's, his personality already evident in his determined cries and fascinated stares. James was a devoted father, spending every free moment with his son. He carried Thomas in a sling while doing chores, narrating everything he did. This is a fence post, son. Someday you'll help me mend these. And that's a cow. They're dumber than rocks, but they are living. Eleanor watched them together and felt her heart swell. This was what she'd traveled across the country for, though she hadn't known it at the time. Not just security or a roof over her head, but this, love and family and belonging. Autumn brought the cattle drive again, but this time James was reluctant to go. I don't want to leave you and Thomas, he said. We'll be fine, Eleanor assured him. Martha will check on us, and I'm perfectly capable of handling the ranch for 2 weeks. Besides, we need the money from the cattle sale. James went, but he hired an older cowboy named Ben to stay on the ranch while he was gone, just in case Eleanor needed help. Ben was a taciturn man in his 60s who'd worked cattle his whole life and had no family. He slept in the barn and was respectful toward Eleanor, helping with the heavy work and teaching her how to manage the cattle in James's absence. When James returned, successful cattle sale completed, he brought gifts, a new dress for Eleanor, a carved wooden horse for Thomas, and enough money to make winter comfortable. He also brought news that the railroad was expanding, bringing more settlers to the area. Red Cloud was growing, becoming a real town with a school and a church and multiple businesses. It's changing, James said, sounding uncertain. Not sure if that's good or bad. It's progress, Eleanor said. More neighbors, more opportunities. We can adapt. They did adapt. The new railroad stop meant better prices for their cattle and easier access to supplies. More families moved into the area, and Eleanor made friends with other ranch wives. They gathered for quilting bees and shared recipes and supported each other through the hardships of prairie life. Thomas grew into a sturdy toddler with his father's eyes and his mother's determination. He took his first steps in the garden, chasing a chicken, and spoke his first word at 13 months. Papa. James was so proud he couldn't stop grinning for days. In the spring of 1878, Eleanor discovered she was pregnant again. This time she was less worried, more confident. She knew what to expect, and James, while still protective, was less panicked. They told Thomas he was going to be a big brother, though at 18 months he didn't really understand. I hope it's a girl, Eleanor said one evening, her hand on her growing belly. Thomas needs a sister. I just hope for healthy, James said, But Eleanor saw the wistfulness in his face. He wanted a daughter. The baby came in December during a snowstorm, and James was there from the beginning this time, holding Eleanor's hand and murmuring encouragement. The labor was shorter than with Thomas, and when the midwife announced it was a girl, James laughed with pure joy. A daughter, he said, cradling the tiny infant. Eleanor, we have a daughter. They named her Rose after James's mother. She had Eleanor's brown hair and a calm disposition that was the opposite of her boisterous brother. Thomas, now 2, was fascinated by his baby sister, constantly wanting to hold her and kiss her and show her his toys. The ranch continued to prosper. James converted some of the land to wheat farming, and the crop did well. They hired 2 permanent hands to help with the work, older men who lived in a small bunkhouse James built. The house got another addition, a proper dining room and a second bedroom for the children. Eleanor looked around at what they'd built and marveled. 5 years ago, she'd stepped off a stagecoach with nothing but a small trunk and desperate hope. Now she had a thriving ranch, a beautiful home, a husband she loved deeply, and 2 healthy children. She'd gone from having nowhere to go to having everything she'd ever wanted. One evening in the summer of 1879, Eleanor and James sat on the porch watching Thomas, now 3, chase fireflies in the yard. Rose slept in her cradle nearby, and the prairie stretched golden in the sunset light. "Do you ever regret it?" James asked suddenly. "Answering my advertisement? Coming here?" Eleanor looked at him in surprise. "Never. Not for one single moment. Do you regret sending for me?" "God, no." James took her hand, threading his fingers through hers. "You're the best thing that ever happened to me. You took a lonely man and gave him a family, a home, a reason to be better. I love you more than I thought it was possible to love anyone." "I love you too," Eleanor said, squeezing his hand. "You saved me, James. I had nowhere else to go, and you made sure I never had to leave. You gave me everything." "We gave each other everything," James corrected. He pulled her close, and Eleanor rested her head on his shoulder. They sat in comfortable silence, watching their son play and listening to their daughter's soft breathing. The prairie wind whispered through the grass, carrying the scent of growing wheat and wildflowers. Cattle lowed in the distance, and the evening birds sang their twilight songs. This was home. This was family. This was everything Eleanor had dreamed of during those dark days in Philadelphia when her future had seemed so bleak. She traveled halfway across the country to marry a stranger, and that stranger had become her whole world. Years passed, and the Whitmore Ranch became one of the most respected operations in the region. James's hard work and Eleanor's careful management paid off, allowing them to expand their holdings and improve their stock. They hired more hands, built larger barns, and purchased better equipment. But they never lost sight of what mattered most: each other and their growing family. Thomas grew into a serious boy who loved working with his father, learning everything about ranching and farming. Rose was her mother's daughter, equally at home in the garden or the kitchen, with a gift for soothing both animals and people. In 1881, Eleanor gave birth to another son, whom they named William after James's father. 2 years later came twin girls Grace and Clara, who kept the entire household on their toes with their mischief and energy. The house expanded again to accommodate the growing family. James proved to be a gifted carpenter, and the house evolved from a simple 2-room sod structure into a proper frame house with multiple bedrooms, a large kitchen, and even a parlor for entertaining. Eleanor decorated it with curtains, rugs, and photographs, making it warm and inviting. By 1885, Red Cloud had grown into a prosperous town with a population of over 2,000. The railroad brought commerce and culture, and Eleanor and James became pillars of the community. They donated money to build the schoolhouse where their children attended classes. They hosted barn dances that brought neighbors together. They supported new settlers, offering advice and assistance just as others had helped them. One autumn evening in 1886, Eleanor stood in her kitchen preparing supper for her family. 10 years of marriage, 5 children, and countless challenges overcome. She was 34 now, with laugh lines around her eyes and silver threads in her brown hair. Her hands were work roughened, her body changed by childbearing and hard labor. But she was happy, deeply, genuinely happy. James came in from the fields, Thomas and William trailing behind him. At 39, James's dark hair was beginning to gray at the temples, and his face bore the lines of a man who spent his life outdoors. But his blue eyes still lit up when he saw Eleanor, and his smile still made her heart skip a beat. "Something smells good," he said, kissing her cheek. "Pot roast. The children will be hungry." Eleanor stirred the pot on the stove. "How was the wheat harvest?" "Excellent. Best yield we've ever had." James leaned against the counter, watching her work. "I've been thinking about buying the old Peterson place. It adjoins our northern boundary, and with the children growing up, we'll need more land for them." "All of them want to ranch?" Eleanor asked, amused. "Thomas does for certain. William might want to farm instead. It's too early to tell with the girls, but I want them to have options." James reached for her hand. "I want to leave them something substantial, Eleanor. Something built on what we started." "We'll leave them something better than land," Eleanor said. "We'll leave them the example of a good marriage, of hard work and integrity and love. That's worth more than acres." James pulled her close, despite the children playing in the next room and supper on the stove. "How did I get so lucky?" "We both got lucky," Eleanor said. "Or maybe it wasn't luck. Maybe it was fate. Maybe we were supposed to find each other." "I like that idea." James kissed her properly, and Eleanor melted into him, still feeling that flutter of excitement even after 10 years. Rose appeared in the doorway, 9 years old and practical. "Mama, Papa, the potatoes are about to boil over." They broke apart, laughing, and Eleanor tended to the stove while James gathered the children for supper. Soon the table was surrounded by their family. Thomas at 12, tall and serious, Rose at 9, clever and observant, William at 5, always asking questions, and the 4-year-old twins, Grace and Clara, chattering over each other in their excitement. Eleanor looked around the table at the faces she loved more than her own life and felt overwhelmed with gratitude. She caught James's eye, and he smiled at her, understanding everything she felt without words. After supper, while Eleanor and Rose cleaned up, James took the other children outside to look at the stars. Eleanor stood at the window, watching them clustered together in the yard, James pointing out constellations while the children gazed upward in wonder. "Papa loves us very much," Rose said softly, coming to stand beside her mother. "Yes, he does," Eleanor agreed. "And I love all of you more than I can say." "Were you scared when you came here to marry Papa?" Rose asked. She was at the age where she'd started asking questions about how her parents met, trying to understand the story of her own origin. Eleanor considered the question. "Yes, I was very scared. I didn't know him, didn't know if he'd be kind or cruel. I was taking a huge risk. But it worked out. It did. Better than I ever imagined." Eleanor put her arm around her daughter. "Sometimes the things that scare us most lead to the greatest joys." Rose absorbed this wisdom, then said, "When I grow up, I want a marriage like yours and Papa's." "Then you'll need to find someone who respects you, who sees you as an equal partner. Don't settle for less." Eleanor kissed the top of Rose's head. "You're worth more than that." The seasons turned, and the Whitmore family continued to thrive. James purchased the Peterson property, expanding their holdings significantly. Thomas began taking on more responsibility, preparing to eventually run the ranch himself. Rose showed an interest in teaching and talked about attending normal school when she was old enough. The younger children grew and changed, each developing their own personalities and interests. Eleanor and James's love deepened with each passing year. They'd weathered droughts and blizzards, cattle diseases and crop failures, financial pressures, and the ordinary challenges of raising 5 strong-willed children. Through it all, they remained partners in every sense of the word, facing each challenge together. On a warm June evening in 1890, Eleanor and James celebrated their 14th wedding anniversary. The children had organized a surprise party with help from Martha Henderson and other neighbors. The house filled with friends and family, and there was fiddle music and dancing and a cake that Eleanor pretended to be surprised by, even though she'd found the children practicing making frosting roses for days. As the party wound down and guests began leaving, James pulled Eleanor onto the porch for a private moment. The stars were brilliant overhead, and the prairie stretched dark and mysterious around them. 14 years, James said, holding both her hands. 14 years since you stepped off that stagecoach. Best 14 years of my life, Eleanor said. Though I'm sure the next 14 will be even better. I have something for you. James reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Inside was a delicate necklace with a single pearl pendant. James, it's beautiful. But we can't afford this. We can, and you deserve it. You deserve so much more than I can give you. But this is a start. He fastened the necklace around her neck. I wanted you to have something beautiful, something that shows how precious you are to me. Eleanor touched the pearl, her eyes filling with tears. You've given me everything that matters. This life, this family, this love. I never dreamed I could be this happy. Eleanor Whitmore, you are my heart, my home, my everything. James cupped her face in his hands. I thank God every day that you answered my advertisement, that you took a chance on a lonely cowboy with more cattle than sense. Eleanor laughed through her tears. I thank God every day that you were that lonely cowboy, that you sent for me, that you made sure I never had to leave. They kissed under the Nebraska stars, two people who'd found each other against all odds and built something beautiful together. Around them, the ranch they'd created hummed with life. Cattle settling for the night, horses nickering in the barn, children laughing inside the house. This was the life Eleanor had traveled so far to find. This was the home she'd needed so desperately. And this was the love that had made it all possible. Inside, Thomas called for them to come see something, and Eleanor and James went back into the house hand in hand. The party continued into the evening, full of music and laughter and love. Eleanor looked around at the faces of everyone who mattered to her, all gathered in the home she and James had built, and felt complete. She'd had nowhere else to go 14 years ago, stepping off that stagecoach with nothing but hope and desperation. But James Whitmore had opened his home and his heart to her. He'd given her security, yes, but so much more than that. He'd given her partnership and respect. He'd given her children and community. He'd given her a life rich with meaning and purpose. Most importantly, he'd given her love. Real, deep, lasting love that had grown from fragile beginnings into something unshakable. They'd built this life together, one day at a time, one decision at a time, one act of faith at a time. And Eleanor knew with absolute certainty that she would never have to leave. This was where she belonged. This was home. This was forever. The years that followed brought both joy and challenge. In 1892, a drought threatened the crops and pushed the cattle industry hard. James and Eleanor worked tirelessly to keep their ranch viable, making difficult decisions about which stock to keep and which to sell. Thomas, now 18, proved invaluable, his youth and strength supplementing his father's experience. The family survived the drought, though it cost them. But they were together, and that was what mattered. Eleanor watched her older children growing into capable adults and felt pride mixed with bittersweet nostalgia for their childhoods. Rose, at 16, was beautiful and intelligent, already teaching at the Red Cloud Schoolhouse during the winter terms while continuing her own education. She had inherited her mother's compassion and her father's quiet strength, and young men in the county were beginning to notice. James cleaned his rifle pointedly whenever suitors came calling, but Eleanor reminded him that Rose was sensible and would make good choices. Thomas was courting the daughter of a neighboring rancher, a practical girl named Catherine, who knew ranching and didn't mind hard work. Eleanor liked her and could see Thomas settling down soon. perhaps building a house on the northern section of the property and starting his own family. The younger children were still at home, still needing guidance and love. William at 11 was fascinated by machinery and talked about the new agricultural equipment coming out. The twins at 10 were inseparable, creating their own language and getting into constant mischief that somehow always resulted in dirt and chaos. In the fall of 1893, Thomas married Catherine in a ceremony at the Red Cloud Church. Eleanor cried happy tears as she watched her firstborn son pledge his life to a good woman. James stood tall and proud, welcoming Catherine into the family with genuine warmth. True to their plans, Thomas and Catherine built a small house on the northern property and began building their own herd. Thomas continued working closely with James, but having his own stake in the operation made him even more invested in the ranch's success. By 1895, Rose was courting a young lawyer named Henry Morrison, who'd opened a practice in Red Cloud. He was kind and intelligent and treated Rose with the respect she deserved. James gave his blessing, and Eleanor helped Rose prepare for her wedding in the spring of 1896. Eleanor was 44 now, with grown children and a life so full it sometimes amazed her. The hardships and sorrows of her youth in Philadelphia seemed like they'd happened to someone else. That frightened young woman who'd stepped off the stagecoach 20 years ago had become this, a confident ranch wife, mother of 5, respected member of her community. She and James stood on the porch one evening after Rose's wedding, watching the sunset paint the prairie in shades of gold and crimson. 20 years of marriage lay behind them, and who knew how many more ahead. "I never get tired of this view," Eleanor said, leaning against James's solid warmth. "Neither do I." But James was looking at her, not the sunset. Eleanor smiled and turned to face him. At 49, James's hair was more silver than dark, and lines had carved deep grooves around his eyes and mouth. But he was still the most handsome man she'd ever known, and her love for him hadn't diminished one bit in 20 years. "We've built something good here," James said, gesturing at the ranch spread before them. "Better than I ever imagined when I placed that advertisement." "We've built more than a ranch," Eleanor said. "We've built a legacy. Our children are good people, James. They're going to go out into the world and make it better. Because they had you as a mother." James pulled her close. "Everything good in my life comes from you." "We gave each other good lives," Eleanor corrected. "Partnership, remember?" "Partnership," James agreed. He kissed her forehead, and Eleanor closed her eyes, savoring the moment. After 20 years, these quiet moments of connection were still her favorites. The years marched on. Thomas and Catherine had 3 children, 2 boys and a girl. Rose and Henry settled in Red Cloud, and Rose continued teaching while raising her 2 daughters. William went to study mechanical engineering at the university in Lincoln, writing home regularly about his studies and the amazing machines he was learning to repair and build. Grace and Clara remained at home through their teenage years, helping Eleanor manage the household and learning the skills they'd need as wives and mothers themselves. They were less interested in ranching than their older siblings, more drawn to music and art. Eleanor encouraged their interests, wanting them to have choices beyond what she'd had. In 1900, as the new century dawned, Eleanor and James celebrated their 24th wedding anniversary quietly at home. They were in their late 40s now, still healthy and active, but feeling the toll of years of hard physical labor. James's back ached on cold mornings, and Eleanor's hands sometimes cramped from arthritis. But they were still deeply in love, still partners in every sense. They'd weathered everything life threw at them and emerged stronger. Their ranch was prosperous, their children were thriving, and their love had only deepened with time. One evening, sitting on their porch, as they'd done countless times over the years, Eleanor said, "I've been thinking about that girl who came here 24 years ago. So frightened, so desperate. I wish I could tell her how everything turns out." "What would you say?" James asked, his arm around her shoulders. "I'd tell her to be brave, that taking the risk is worth it, that answering that advertisement will lead to everything she ever wanted and more." Eleanor looked up at the stars, remembering the terror and hope that had warred within her on that stagecoach journey. I'd tell her that James Whitmore will be the best thing that ever happens to her. I'd tell him the same about Eleanor Zimmerman, James said softly. That lonely cowboy who didn't know how to be around people, who'd forgotten how to hope for more than survival. I'd tell him that she'll teach him how to live, how to love, how to be happy. They sat in comfortable silence, wrapped in shared memories and contentment. The prairie stretched vast around them, the same prairie that had witnessed their first meeting, their struggles, their triumphs, their love. Eleanor thought about all the choices that had led her here. Answering the advertisement, stepping off that stagecoach, agreeing to marry James after one conversation. Every choice had been a leap of faith, and everyone had led her closer to this moment, this life, this perfect, imperfect happiness. I had nowhere else to go, she said quietly. That day in Red Cloud, I literally had nowhere else in the world to go. My parents were dead. My uncle had cast me out. I had no money and no prospects. I was at the absolute end of my rope. I know. James tightened his arm around her. But you made sure I never had to leave. You gave me a home, James. Not just a house, but a real home. A place where I belonged, where I was wanted, where I could be myself and build a life. You gave me everything. You gave me everything too, James said. Before you came, I was half dead inside, just going through the motions, surviving but not living. You brought life back to me. You brought joy and purpose and love. You made me want to be better, do better, build something worth having. Eleanor twisted in his arms so she could see his face. Even in the dim starlight, his blue eyes were clear and bright, still capable of making her breath catch. I love you, she said. 24 years later, with grown children and gray hair and aching joints, I love you more than I did when we married. You're still the best decision I ever made. I love you too, James said. You're still the only good decision I ever made that mattered. Everything else was just preparation for you. They kissed, a gentle kiss that held 24 years of love and partnership. Then they sat together on the porch, watching the stars wheel overhead and listening to the night sounds of the prairie they'd made their home. Inside the house, the clock chimed 10. Soon they'd go inside, lock up, and retire to the bedroom they'd shared for so many years. They'd lie together in the darkness, James's arm around Eleanor, and drift off to sleep as they did every night, secure in their love and their life together. But for now, they sat on the porch, two people who'd taken a chance on each other 24 years ago and built something beautiful. Eleanor had had nowhere else to go, and James had made sure she never had to leave. It was a simple story, really, but it was theirs, and it was everything. The prairie wind whispered through the grass, carrying with it the promise of tomorrow and all the tomorrows to come. Whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever joys or sorrows the future held, Eleanor and James would face them together, as they always had. Partners, lovers, friends, forever. And as they finally went inside to bed, Eleanor took one last look at the vast, starlit prairie and thought about that terrified girl on the stagecoach, traveling toward an unknown future with nothing but hope to sustain her. She sent a silent message back through the years. It's going to be all right. Better than all right. It's going to be everything you ever dreamed of and more. The cowboy waiting for you in Red Cloud will make sure you're never alone again. She closed the door softly and followed James to their bedroom, to their bed, to the peaceful sleep of people who'd worked hard and loved well. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new joys, new moments to cherish. But tonight, they had each other, and that was everything that mattered. In the quiet of the night, the Whitmore ranch settled into stillness. Cattle drowsed in the pastures. Horses shifted in their stalls. In the small house on the northern property, Thomas and Catherine slept with their children safe under their roof. In Red Cloud, Rose and Henry tucked their daughters into bed and spoke quietly about their own day. And in the main house, Eleanor and James lay together as they had for 24 years, their bodies fitting together perfectly from long practice, their breathing synchronized in the peace of deep love and trust. They'd built this life together, one day at a time, one choice at a time, one act of faith at a time. Eleanor's last thought before sleep took her was simple and profound. I'm home. I'm finally, truly home. And she was. Forever and always, she was home.